Hello, listeners. My name is Lowell, pronouns he, him, and welcome to the Gauntlet Podcast. I am joined by my co-host, David.
Hi, nice to be here again.
And we have with us this month Will from the Gauntlet, who has been a longtime Gauntleteer and who has been running some amazing stuff, some stuff that I've been playing in this month, and has done a lot of great things with the Star Wars Saturday series. Interesting things that have made Rich, our Star Wars Saturday guru, go, oh, I wish I'd done that. I wish I'd thought of that. So thank you for coming on the program today.
Oh, thank you for having me. That's great. I don't deal well with praise, so...
I know exactly what you mean. So in our first segment, each of us is going to briefly go over the RPGs that we played on the Gauntlet and off in, at this point, July and August, maybe a little bit later depending on things. We're going to choose one of those games that we played on the Gauntlet to talk about in depth. We're going to start with David. David, tell us, how was your July, August?
So my July and August have been moderately quiet, at least for the standards of some of the people on the Gauntlet. But in terms of stuff I've played off the Gauntlet, I've played a couple of sessions of the sort of ongoing campaign of Forbidden Lands, which I think I mentioned the last time I was here, as well as playing a couple of games which I must admit are in a kind of, I'm not quite sure whether to classify them as on or off Gauntlet, technically off, I think, playtesting Jamie's Decline Oblige, which has been a whole lot of fun. So that's been great. On Gauntlet, I finished up running a series of Good Society that I ran over June, July. That was a whole lot of fun. Longest game of it I've got to play, which was great. I've had a chance to play some of the Between with Alan running that, which was great fun. I've also got a chance to play in a brief bit of playtest of Sawyer's new game that he's working on currently, Dying Embers, I believe that's called, at least currently. But again, that's still in very, very early playtest at the minute. So,
okay.
I'm really curious now.
Yeah, seriously. Can you give us the pitch line at least?
No, certainly. It definitely feels like a kind of PBTA game that draws a lot from Apocalypse World rather than a lot of the post stuff. I feel a lot of that idea of that kind of post-apocalyptic world with lots of magic, dark fantasy stuff in there, rather than being kind of more on the sci-fi end of the post-apoc spectrum.
Okay.
But no, it's really interesting. I like what I've seen of it so far. I said it's just in an early stage of playtest at the minute, so I won't go into any more detail right now. But
I'm just so happy to hear that we having people playtesting new and cool stuff.
Exactly,
on the Gauntlet.
Exactly. The game, however, I'm going to talk about today was, I ran a one-off of Voidheart Symphony, specifically using the Kill or Cure Quick Start package.
Now, this is hot. This only came out like a couple weeks ago.
It did indeed, yeah. And I ran this as of the time of recording last weekend. So this is fairly hot off the presses one. But that's what I'll be talking about today. As Lowell just mentioned, the Kill or Cure Quick Start in particular has only just been released. It's a quick start version of Voidheart Symphony, which, in all honesty, preserves the majority of the rules from that game. It just streamlines a few elements of it. It streamlines down like character creation options, all that sort of stuff. And it is designed for quicker play, for sort of getting to the table and playing straight off, kind of in a one-shot setting, which is how I ran it, or as the sort of starting point for a campaign. So this is a game by Minerva McJander of UFO Press. It is a sequel to Rhapsody of Blood, which was one of the Worlds of Legacy games which were released as part of the original, or I should say the original second edition Legacy Kickstarter. In terms of what the game is, it's a sort of urban fantasy-ish street-level rebellion game which also involves travelling into an alternate dimension that's formed by the psyche of people abusing power in a sort of modern city. It's inspired very much by the Persona games, Persona 5 in specific, I believe. I personally haven't played any of them, so I couldn't speak to them as an emulation of that. But
I have never played it either. You're saying that, I'm thinking The Invisibles is maybe the closest thing I can think of.
Yeah.
You know?
The other thing I mentioned when we were running it the other day, actually, that kind of, in terms of how some of the aspects of the game work, is the old game, which has just been a sequel released to, Psychonauts, which again is about kind of diving into people's minds and having wacky adventures inside their heads.
I love Persona, so this is very exciting to me.
Excellent. Specifically, Kill or Cure is a quick start. It's available, pay what you want, on the UFO Press website. So if you do want to give it a check out and see if this game might be for you or not, it's a good place to do it. In terms of what worked for me for this, so I'll talk a little bit, like I said, about the actual Kill or Cure package itself, because it is a kind of repackage. I mean, the Voidheart Symphony itself is only fairly recently out as well, but what I think really works with how this quick start is done is it's very well designed, which is, I am not at all surprised, given Minerva is very good at that kind of layout and stuff like that. But it has a very good flow of information. You're kind of introduced to what you need to know as you need to know it. The playbooks have all been rationalized down a bit, so what you get in this are kind of truncated versions of the full playbooks that don't have all the move choices and things like that, and they just give you one quick overview, one sort of interpretation of that playbook. They give you a sort of pencil sketch of a character to start with, which is all designed, like I said, to get you off the ground and into the game quickly without having to make a lot of decisions sitting down as a player before you begin. So I think that's all done very well. The art that's used in the playbook, which again is obviously from the full release version of the game, but the way that the art plays in with the theming of each of the characters works very well. You kind of get a very good grasp of them straight away. In terms of Voyager Symphony itself as a game, I don't think we've spoken about it much on here before. I could be misremembering.
I don't know much about Voidheart Symphony at all, to be honest.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we've talked about Legacy and Free from the Yoke a little bit, but in fact, I don't think we've ever even talked about Rhapsody of Blood.
No, and I must admit, I personally haven't played Rhapsody of Blood, so my knowledge of that is a little spottier than some of the other Legacy games, which I have played. So
you just jump straight to the sequel.
Yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, what I think is cool about Voidheart Symphony is, like I said, the setting I think is really interesting. The idea is that you will generally play in a more or less modern setting in a city. You could potentially go like near future or recent past, I'd say, but it's very much built with this idea of a modern, in the historical sense, urban city kind of thing. You all play regular people living in the city, but who have all been at some point victimized by the power structures that make up the city, pretty much explicitly sort of capitalistic and generally oppressive forces. You've done something about this, you're rising up in sort of rebellion against them, but in the mundane world you may have, and as things go on, you start to get access to slightly more power, but essentially at the start of the game, in the mundane world, you are a normal person. You have all the powers and abilities that a normal person has. You have to both deal with your living out your normal life, paying bills, getting by, as well as trying to find out information about these powers that be behind the shadows.
So the shadows, the conspiracy is on this supernatural, like psychic plane of existence, but has influence and control over your mundane, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Just keeping the two worlds straight in my head for a second.
Exactly. It's quite high concept, but yeah, that's right. So you essentially have oppressive figures in the real world who, depending on their level of power, may be unwilling puppets of this like dark force that infiltrates the world, or maybe actively participants in bringing about its domination. The other half of the game is, as I said, you then sort of spirit yourselves into this shadow world where you can infiltrate people's minds and learn things about them, work to undo the damage that they've done, bring them down. And in that shadow world, you gain new powers. You become almost superheroic figures fighting in these mindscapes. It's a very, I suppose not necessarily fantasy per se. It can feel a bit more sci-fi, but it's definitely heroic and big and iconic combat, as it were. And that's really cool. And I think what I also really like is how the mechanics differentiate between whether you're in the real world or in the castle. There is essentially entirely separate sets of basic moves, different of the other moves you have access to. I think almost all, with the exception of a couple of very, very basic rules, nearly every move you have can either be used in the real world or the castle. There's not much overlap in that sense. They're sort of played in very different ways. So yeah, and I think that's really cool, and I like the way that those mechanics work, and the flow between them creates these moments of different drama and tension depending on which sort of sphere you're acting in. I think that sort of covered both what I think worked really nicely in terms of this and what worked for me. The bits I'm less sure about, as I kind of alluded to there, for a PBTA game, this is very complicated or very complex. I did a rough count earlier. There are about 20 basic moves.
Wow.
Yeah. Again, as I mentioned, they are segregated out quite nicely. Like, you essentially have a set of basic moves that you use in the real world, a set of basic moves you use in the castle, and then a kind of more focused set of basic moves you use in the big climactic combat. But there are still those 3 separate sets of them there to keep track of.
Yeah.
There are also covenants, which are these bonds with like NPCs that also give you additional powers, which they're all really cool, really evocative. But again, you potentially can have multiple covenants. Each covenant has different moves that are available to you in the castle or in the real world. You have playbook moves that are only usable in the castle. There's a lot of moving parts. There is no way around it.
It sounds like at least it's fairly even, neatly segregated in a lot of,
No,
so like you
absolutely.
don't look at this page, you just look at this page. And okay.
Absolutely. It's quite nicely segregated. But yeah, like I said, if you're coming in from a background of playing things like belonging outside belonging games or the lighter end of the PBTA spectrum or that sort of thing, I think coming to this, there's a lot to keep track of. Honestly, compared to something like D&D or whatever, you're used to looking at pages.
It's not
of
working out the grappling rule, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. The other things are, this is a game that is at its best, I think, in campaign play. Essentially, the idea is that each time you play the game, you're looking at identifying the new threat, taking it down, moving on to the next threat, taking it down, so on and so forth. To take down a threat, you have one of the vassals, is the term used in the game. You have to find out information about them, take on their subordinates, tick off a list, basically, of different things to get to the point where you can sort of take them on in their final form. Trying to get all that done in a one-shot is quite tricky, especially when you're, as you often are with a one-shot, and as I was when I ran it the other day, when you're introducing the rules to new players who aren't familiar with them, when you're looking at moving between different phases, trying to play out different bits of the game. There's a lot of moving parts, and it worked better than I thought it would as a one-shot, certainly. I think it definitely works as a one-shot. I did have to skip over some bits. We kind of had a truncated sort of narrative-only ending to the session, and that sort of thing. We had to take a few shortcuts here and there to get it working. But I have previously run a short campaign of this as well, so I was already kind of familiar with how it works. Coming to it as a new GM with new players, trying to play it as a one-shot would probably be an ambitious ask, to put it lightly. There's a lot going on there. So I think my final takeaway from this, the quick start, is well worth taking a look at if the game sounds interesting to you. It's well designed. There's a lot to get out of there. It streamlines certain aspects of the game, but you are still playing the game. It doesn't really cut anything out in a major way. I think it would work well as, say, like a two-shot.
Been thinking the whole time you've been describing it. I've been like, I bet you I would run this as a two-shot because there's no way I'd get in 3 hours.
Exactly.
Everything else.
And this is the same thing I say every time I do a one-shot thing. I did this as a one-shot in 4 hours. I think it would work better as a two-shot in 2-3 hour sessions. I also find that like nearly every game that markets itself as a one-shot game, I prefer to play it over 2 because, if nothing else, just like some people are very, very good at being very concise with introducing games and running them, I'm not. That's something to be aware of. But yeah, I think it definitely, as a two-shot, I think it would work really nicely. It's a good game, to put it in very simple terms. No, I would definitely recommend checking it out.
And will you be checking out Persona now?
I would like to at some point, yeah. My main barrier to entry on that is I don't have a console, so I can't remember if one of them is coming out on PC at some point, but it's...
You can get Persona 4 on PC on Steam.
Right.
And it is the best of the series. I love Persona 5, but Persona 4 is really good. I love it. I adore the series, the Persona and the Shin Megami Tensei series and so on. So
awesome.
It's my jam.
Perfect.
I think this is the 6th time I've heard somebody mention it in the last week or so. So it's on my to-buy list.
Awesome.
So, Will, tell us how your time was.
My July and August was less hardcore than it was for the entire previous year, which involved pretty much gaming once or twice every day with either the Gauntlet or somebody else. I've stepped that back a bit now. So off Gauntlet, I've just been running I think we're coming up on just about a year now of Curse of Strahd 5e.
Ooh, nice.
It's the second time I've run through the campaign. I've nicked clocks and stuff from Blades. It's been a lot of fun to run through two very different groups, both of which sort of bounced a little bit off PBTA, but I'm still bringing a lot of that to Curse of Strahd.
Right.
Yeah.
Rewrote pretty much all the stuff in the book. And then the other game I played off Gauntlet was Alice is Missing, which took me by surprise, and I really loved it. It was very nice to see one of my D&D players just be like, hey, there's this game I've got. Do you want to play Alice is Missing? And I was like, yeah, this is so different.
Yeah, that's great.
Did you do that face-to-face or online?
We're still playing over Zoom. It's my work. They were the group I originally took through Curse of Strahd, and we've been having abrupt kind of D&D campaigns that are the typical sort of you play a few sessions and you don't go anywhere at the end of the day. But yeah, they just brought up Alice is Missing. We did it over Discord, and it was great. It was really, really good. And then strangely, on Gauntlet, I played Alice is Missing because I'd been booked in to play that for like 2 months. And then my friend said, do you want to play it next week? So I ended up with 2 Alice is Missings. You wait all 2 years to play a game, and then 2 of them show up at once. But yeah, Alice is Missing, a bunch of Star Wars games with Rich, which has been a companion over various points of the year and been great. Hyperspace D6, Swoop Gangs, which is a hack of 1%ers. I've never played 1%ers. Rust Hooks, which I'll talk about a bit more in a bit. And I've run Red Markets, of course, which I'll go into more detail later on. And I also played in Uncharted Worlds, the playtest of the new edition.
Oh.
Yeah, that was fun.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's been interesting to compare that to Rust Hooks as well. There's 2 different games. And I also played a 2-shot of Siren, which was great because I'd never played Siren as a 2-shot before. I've only ever played it as a 1-shot. And it was great as a 1-shot. But the 2-shot really gave it room to breathe, to do more, to tell a better story, to really pace it like a movie as well, with like a quiet middle part that isn't just a scene or so. That's definitely how I'd run Siren in the future. And a 3-shot of Delta Green by Horst, who Horst run. And that was really fun. That was, I think, the first time Horst has actually run Delta Green in the Delta Green system.
Oh, okay.
And one of us died. Not all of us died. Just one of us. So it was a success. But the game I'm going to talk about mainly is the game that we just finished up playing with Rich, Rust Hooks. It's another one that I'd bought. I think I got in just at the end of the Kickstarter, or I bought it just as it came out in print. I can't quite remember, but I'm always very eager to take a book off my shelf and actually play in it. My goal is to not have any books that I haven't played in or run, one or the other. And so far, I've been pretty good.
Really?
Yeah, there's just For the Queen that I haven't actually played on my shelf behind me. Everything else I have played in or run. It helps that you buy the book after you played it.
Yeah,
There you go. To self-select. But yeah, Rust Hooks is a Powered by the Apocalypse game. It's inspired by The Expanse, Firefly, the grungier edges of the Star Wars universe, which we played in. I'd also say like the Aliens blue collar vibe. It's like the start of The Expanse when they're just ice miners, not when they're really like zipping around the solar system, fighting alien proto-molecule and everything like that. It's just when they are blue collar guys on a rusty spaceship that's got holes and they're going ahead. A little bit less big in its scale than the industrial sized ships of The Expanse, but it's that kind of rock hopping, small scale stuff, scrapping your way through space. Of course, we played it in Star Wars Saturdays, which meant that we weren't just rattling around the solar system, we were rattling around hyperspace. So Rust Hooks, we played in Star Wars Saturdays, and it really worked with Star Wars Saturdays, I have to say. I think you could make every space game work in Star Wars, and even though this is slightly on the more blue collar side of things, and there is, Star Wars is a very big mishmash of different cultures and stuff. Like Rust Hooks perfectly fits in there as what happens to Han Solo if he doesn't meet Luke Skywalker and he just carries on being a podunk smuggler, running odd jobs. Yeah, Rust Hooks does offer a very specific, I think, type of space game, but it does all of that really well. You build a ship and its systems during character creation, and it's kind of like you build the actual layout of the ship. You choose a place for the cockpit to be, you choose a place for the engines to be, for the guns, for the bolt holes, and they all have different size ratings that can be used to modify roles or give you extra stuff. I don't know, I really enjoyed building the ship and, imagine it in my head and where all these spaces were. It reminded me of FTL, if anyone's ever played that. I love FTL. I've played that so much. And it was very much like that, looking at your ship, you've got the oxygen room, the systems room, and you need to have one of your crew in the room for it to be effectively used. And you can upgrade different systems and all of that. And I really enjoyed that whole aspect of it. I also really enjoyed, it's quite a mercenary game. There's a focus on getting paid. You have there's some interesting social mechanics in there for intercrew drama, and it has some great moves that are just little themes off the ones we see in every other sort of game. Like convince someone, scope something out, that kind of stuff. And the moves that it does, the basic moves are interesting, and the playbook moves are interesting. It's very interesting how most of the playbook moves are focused upon your intercrew personality, like interpersonal relationships. So it's all about like how you can make other members of the crew do things, how you can change their opinions of them. It feels very much like it's running both an FTL like space scrapping game and a bottle episode interpersonal drama thing at the same time, as well as all of the like firing guns and dodging bullets and stuff like that. But yeah, the mercenary aspect of it is something I really enjoyed. Getting jobs, money, opportunism. You stumble across a space hulk like drifting in space. Do you just leave it? I mean, you almost certainly should leave it, right? Because it's filled with killer droids that are going to fire a harpoon at your ship, and then everyone's going to miss rolls, and you're nearly going to lose the shuttle. But I appreciate like that travel and random encounters are meaningful because you are poor, which is something I will touch up in Red Markets when I talk about it later on. But I did enjoy that in Rust Hulks. So that's stuff that worked for me. I thought it was a great system overall. I think a lot of it's like new system stuff. It's definitely a system that's heavier than a lot of PBTA. There are different currencies, like it doesn't use just credits, and there is scrap as well, which you can use for things, but they're interchangeable in some moves and some things. And then there's fuel plus supply that you need both to fly. So why wouldn't I ever just have both as one unit? The nature of Gauntlet play in the 5 sessions or 4 sessions or whatever, right, is that you don't sink your teeth too much into that without putting like a full effort into it, right? But if you're playing 10 or 20 or whatever, right, you'd probably work out exactly what you wanted to streamline out of those economies. And as much as I love the FTL side, and a lot of that was there in that kind of like the ship mechanics, you've got size 3 this, and you've got 2 fuel this, and the pilot's got skills, and it all overlaps with each other. And do you have someone in the room when it's firing? It felt like a really interesting sort of like trad game to play, but then that did kind of rob the momentum of the PBTA, rolling with the narrative and being the big nerds that we all were in this group. We would all stop and talk through the mechanics, and then half an hour later we'd be like, we should get back to the life or death situation that we were facing just then, which we all loved, but it is a friction point kind of thing.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and I have not played or even for that matter read Rust Hulk, and it sounds quite interesting the way it does it. But yeah, I have struggled to find a game that does you playing the crew of a ship and actually makes what happens when you're all the crew of the ship interesting. Because the problem is that the way a ship sort of works, optimum thing, is the captain tells everyone what to do and they do their job. And that's it.
Yeah, usually race through ship scenes in every other game. Like the pilot does something and maybe one person does something else, and then you land.
Yeah.
There is a role for everyone. I think it does it fairly well, but it just changes the pace and the structure so much, And it has some really interesting social mechanics. There's like every character has like a chain that connects them to another member of the crew, and then that chain is tightened or slackened depending on how you feel about each other, and then it's heated or cooled depending on how intense that feeling is. But again, it just adds a little bit too much to really. You have a 5-minute conversation about how your chains and your things work rather than feel it thing, and we quickly all ended up in each other's pockets. After starting off very, very tense, we quickly just used the moves to end up all good friends by the end of it, which felt nice and as a sort of story arc, but did rob that mechanic of a lot of its depth. It's tied in with the aid move, and the aid move, when we looked at it, there was, if you had a bad relationship with someone, you basically just effectively couldn't aid them without just giving the GM a billion hard moves rather than the one that they'd an uninteresting stacking of consequences, I guess. But then my major takeaway from all of Rust Hulks is that it was a good game. And I think it's just one that I would need to tweak and remove some currencies to really get to it. And It worked really well in Star Wars Saturdays. I think something a little bit more blue collar might work. Perhaps like explicitly Star Wars, but right at the bottom level, like you are explicitly scrappers on Jakku or something, right? Or you're not a daring ex-corporate thingy, or a daring ex-corporate executive, a cartel boss on the run, a person who has been in, I think, like every role in the galaxy, bounty hunter, pilot, whatever. And the Itorium scrapper mechanic was the only one of us who really felt like deep into the system. The rest of us all felt like the what's it called? The cosmopolitan cast of a Star Wars pulp adventure, which is great, but I don't think is what the system lends itself to, particularly in that sense.
It's very interesting because on Sunday, I had a chance to talk with Rich, and every couple of weeks, we get together and we talk about the games that we've done and what we think and talk about stuff. And his impression of Star Wars is he really was uncertain with Rest Hulks, how well it could be done for Star Wars, because there were mechanics like the chains that didn't like feed the Star Wars feel. And I could tell from listening to him that he had enjoyed himself, but he was really torn about that. Like it kind of halfway did what he wanted. It was a good Star Wars game, but the game itself wasn't aimed that way. It was more Firefly and that kind of tension than it was your typical Star Wars cast.
It's less bombastic, a lower budget than a Star Wars movie, or at least lower scale, definitely. But, with all that said, I did enjoy it. I think that's one of the joys of Star Wars Saturdays, right, is that it's a great way to try new games and put them into a different thing and stress test it a little bit as well,
Mm-hmm.
And it really helps. It was really easy to come up with NPC Contacts or understand what this place was like. It's part of Zinja's empire. It's a criminal underworld. So we know exactly. And someone created a bar with a living Sarlacc underneath the glass floor. And it was just, we all just stopped and was like, wow, that's incredible. But now that will live in our memories as part of the Star Wars universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I'm saying Rust Hulks probably isn't the best fit for Star Wars, I am also saying that like Star Wars brings a lot to those kind of, let's try a new game out and do it. Those are my two major takeaways, is that I enjoyed Rust Hulks. I also enjoyed playing Rust Hulks in Star Wars, even if I think that perhaps Rust Hulks works better in The Expanse.
Awesome. So let me talk about my games that I did the last couple of months. Off Gauntlet did our 13th Age ongoing campaign, which is actually face-to-face, which still scares the hell out of me, but we're doing it. And then the Hearts of Wulin game, that's a home group. We're still doing that one online. And then we've done a couple of sessions of Songs for the Dusk, which is a science fantasy post-apocalyptic Blades in the Dark game that we've only played one session, so I still don't kind of know exactly what the feel is yet, but it's got some neat stuff to it.
I liked all the words that you just said.
Yes.
Yeah.
On Gauntlet, I've done Godbound, which I know Sherry talked about in a previous episode, and I did a Masks game that was a short campaign, and then I'm doing Masks Year 1, which is everybody's playing existing characters from comic books or movies, done a revisioning of those. Also have done Changing Lost PBTA, Dune, Against Our Conspiracy. I did that Hearts of Wulin, Brindlewood Bayhack, and Red Markets, which I know you're going to talk about here in a little bit, which I appreciate you running. The other thing is I've been running Trail of Cthulhu, and this was a game that was originally supposed to be 5 sessions, but we ended up actually doing it in 4, and I'll come back to why that is. Trail of Cthulhu is, in short, it's the gumshoe system version of Call of Cthulhu. It is set in the 1930s rather than the 1920s, and that has a huge impact. That's a much bigger thing that I think people give it credit for. The change in what that means in society and culture and so on is massive.
I've never really liked the 1920s setting of Call of Cthulhu. I've always leaned more towards like it's Indiana Jones kind of era. It's like stuff,
I think a lot of the time as well is even when people kind of picture the 1920s in their head, what they're thinking about is like 1929. That sort of...
Yeah.
Because like early 1920s are, you're still like sort of almost quasi-Victorian at that stage, aren't you?
I would agree with that, except that there are some really interesting bits in the 1920s. The whole Harlem Underground, which I'm going to talk about, is the issue there. There's amazing stuff going on in Egypt in the 1920s, a whole like cosmopolitan international culture. Like there's some great bits in the 1920s, but the 1930s definitely is a little richer, but it's definitely different.
I think it's the prominence of aristocratic, they could be Victorian characters, because it's the Call of Cthulhu classic adventuring party, which is a bunch of socialites from flappers and socialites from the 1920s run around, whereas the 1930s feels a little bit more industrial,
yes,
grittier, you know?
It's definitely more diesel punk or something. Gumshoe, for people that don't know, is split between a mechanics of investigation, which basically, if you kind of know a thing, you can get information, but you can also make spends to get more information. And on the other side, you've got the general abilities, which are, if you're going to make a roll, you're almost always spending from these different pools. Related to that, my version is a little bit of a hack. Rather than having a big list of like 24 investigative skills, I broke them down into categories and put the push mechanic, the currency that you use, attached to those groups. So this is a little bit like Cthulhu 1-to-1, or like the Yellow King RPG, and borrowing a little bit from that. I also combined sanity and stability and did some other changes like bennies for high rolls. A lot of this is mechanics suggested by Kat Raman to me a few years ago when she was running Trail of Cthulhu. I talked to her about that, and she gave me some notes. So it's very close to regular Trail of Cthulhu, but I've made a couple of changes that actually worked for me. Overall, Trail of Cthulhu, I like it because this game does group up the skills in a way that makes it easier to go through the list. Because it's much easier to go, okay, like here's an academic skill. I kind of know what the academic categories are. It felt like it was faster to find it on those things. It kind of reduced the cognitive load in play. The other thing I did with the game is this was very much an urban focus game, and I had told the players this ahead of time. This was going to be New York. I originally thought about Boston or so on, but I ended up going with New York because I had a couple of books on 1930s New York, and I had a copy of the WPA guide to New York City. So I had a lot of reference material. I was able to use that for some color, and I had read some other sources. I really wanted to get that feel of an urban city away from sort of the Lovecraftian, weird backwoods thing. I think that worked. I think that the Gumshoe system works and it creates tension. And certainly as we went along, I felt like the system started to really click for me. I had run it with a home group a while back, but I felt like I got it a little more under control, especially when we were a little more focused on one city. The other group had been like California and Los Angeles and moving around that way, and that had been different. But the biggest thing that's kind of weird is maybe a thing I'm learning about how I run in general is I'm really bad at judging how long an investigation is going to take. Like, I'm terrible at it. I had that when we played Brindlewood Bay, Will, where I was kind of like, okay, we're going to get this done in one session, we're going to get this done in two. I'm very bad at that.
Yeah, but you made it look so easy because you just made it seem as though it was always intentional that we did it. We did 1.5 mysteries per session.
Yes. Kind of, and then we roll into the next one because we have some time for that.
Yeah.
But when I ran that Hearts of Wulin Numberless Secrets recently, which is very much Brindlewood Bay, the first mystery that I did, I was very much in my, okay, we're going to get this done in 2 sessions mode. And that kind of compacted things. And so when we went into the second mystery, I just let it breathe. I let them do what they wanted. I let them push the flow. I didn't kind of push into, okay, maybe we're going to theorize. Maybe you should go be looking for clues. And that felt really good.
Do people take notes in your sessions?
Yes. Yes, there are some notes taken.
Because when I think about letting the mysteries breathe, I always worry about that. But will they remember what they discovered at the start of session 1 by the end of session 2?
See, but with Brindlewood, it kind of doesn't matter because you've got that clue list, and then they're going to remake it up
Yeah.
anyway.
So with Brindlewood, it was fine. I was just wondering with Trail of Cthulhu whether that same held true.
Certainly, Agatha was making notes, and people were good about stopping and going, okay, let's review what we know so far. Let's go over it. And the other thing I did is at the end of the session, I said, okay, here are the threads that you have outstanding. And then at the start of the session, I said, here are the threads that you have outstanding. So I did that very explicitly. And it was fun. I thought we would get through in 5 sessions 2 or 3 mysteries. And I told them that at the start. I said, this is how I imagine it. And we did 1 mystery in 4 sessions. And at the end of the 4th session, they got to a point where the group actually split, and essentially 2 of them ran away and 2 of them went through this portal to the other world. And I was like, okay, I think we're going to epilogues then. I really love running mysteries. I adore them. And I need to let go of the okay, we got to get to the next clue. We got to do this. We got to let it breathe. Have lots of cool NPCs. It's okay if characters go in different places and they maybe get sort of the same thing as long as they're getting a different perspective and some different takes on what it is to confirm stuff. And so that was good. I really liked it. I've got a lot of stuff. And so I know I'm going to have to run this again just because I've got so much material. And I do think that this Gumshoe adaptation worked. Just changing up Gumshoe a little bit. I do want to run Delta Green now. But I don't know if I want to go and run Delta Green as it's written, whether I want to run Fall of Delta Green and adapt that, whether I want to do my Night's Black Agents Express version. But I think I want to run like a Delta Green quarterly. I picked up that campaign module. I'm not sure if I'm going to run from that or if I would run from something new.
I think Impossible Landscapes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very trippy.
It's trippy and directed, and I've been reading through it, and while I've enjoyed reading it, and I think I'm glad I bought it to read, I don't know if that's what I want to run. So that's my takeaway. It's all food for thought for running Delta Green, and I had a good time running it, and I'm glad I ran Trail of Cthulhu. All right, listeners, we're going to move on to our second segment. The next Gauntlet Community Open Gaming will be happening the weekend of October 14th through the 17th of 2021. GCOG is the Gauntlet Gaming Community's free online tabletop RPG convention. Over the weekend, we'll be offering more than 24 sessions with games like Brindlewood Bay, Monster of the Week, Hearts of Wulin, Star Wars Swoop Gangs, and more. All sessions are run with a set of safety tools and follow the Gauntlet Code of Conduct. Registration opens Monday, September 20th at 12 o'clock noon U.S. Eastern Time. We created the con to help new players get used to online play, showcase indie games, and introduce folks to our community. If you want to check out the event listings, go to bit.ly/GCOG events, all smushed together. For more detail on registration and procedures, go to bit.ly/gauntlet-community. We hope we'll see you there. Will, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, I want to talk about the game I ran for my Gauntlet Facilitator Camp, which was largely just to see could I ever possibly get this game to an online table. And that is Red Markets by Caleb Stokes of Hebanon Games, which I think was one of the first RPGs that I ever knew of or conceived of that wasn't D&D.
Really?
Yeah, via the One Shot podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing the Red Markets Kickstarter at the time, and they played a game with Ross and Caleb from RPPR, and it just was like, oh wow, you can do so much with this. And it was really interesting, and it was definitely the first game I ran that wasn't D&D. And it was great. But anyways, Red Markets is a game of economic horror. The world has ended, but the rent is still due. It's a zombie apocalypse, but it's a zombie apocalypse of haves and have-nots. The world didn't end everywhere equally, basically. The undead are just the weather. Money is why you have to go out beyond your safe walls and face the undead, retrieve goods, do jobs. It's basically like Down and Out meets Dawn of the Dead. Yeah, I love all of those themes. I love all of the story, and I think it's a really interesting take on the zombie, and it really ties back into, you know, a lot of the Romero era, the themes of the zombie apocalypse. rather than it just being like Army of the Dead, where it's run around with guns and shoot things.
Yeah.
And pay lip service to those ideas, but never interact with them in any interesting way, shape, or form. This isn't me critiquing the Army of the Dead movie. I'll move on back to Red Markets. Just because that Army of the Dead is a Red Markets movie entirely, but just done so badly.
Yeah.
But Red Markets runs on the profit system, which I don't think has been used for any other game at this point. He's got another game in development called Sling Zone, which is all about fighting superheroes or godlike beings, which I'm really interested in because it sounds like Knights Black Boys, basically. The profit system is you roll black plus like any additional modifiers versus a red die that you roll at the same time. The market, what they call the GM, never rolls pretty much any of the time apart from like to spawn zombie hordes and how far away they are from you.
Or how much debt you might owe, like you've done to me.
Yes. Well, a 1d10 does come up 10 sometimes, though, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Which is a crippling debt to have on you, I think, at the start of any job. But welcome to being poor.
Yes.
I don't know if any other games use a similar sort of the challenge, the DC dice rolls at the same time as the player dice. Because that's effectively what it is, right? The red is a DC and it's changing. But I quite like it as well because there's always an uncertainty about everything, right? Like you can never just be like, this is hard and I always resist the urge to stack on like modifiers to that aren't coming directly from the rules themselves. GM fiat kind of like,
Right.
Oh, you get a +1 because you did a setup action or whatever. I'm like, nah, I think it's more interesting that way. And it's more interesting that way because pretty much everything in Red Markets has a cost attached to it. Everything you do, you have to pay for pretty much, to the point where one of the slower parts of the game is the fact that people keep asking, do I have to pay extra for this or for that, because some things require 2 different charges, some things just require 1 charge from one thing. It all works together to give you this sort of like the bleed of working.
And let's get down to it. If I want to dodge a physical action, I have to spend a ration because that's body fuel. That's how hard it gets down to it. And we saw this week's session, Horst run out of rations in the middle of a combat thing and almost get chewed up because he had exhausted himself.
Yeah, I mean, Horst, I think, finally connected with that sword like twice out of about a dozen attempts. But yeah, it grinds you down. It grinds your players down. You start off every job fairly well stocked, but a few bad rolls and suddenly like your pockets are got holes in them. You don't have any bullets left. You might not even have like the stamina to run out of here because you don't have enough of your your meta resources available to either reload your gun or reload your ability to run away, basically. And spend big to win big is a part of it, but also spending big doesn't guarantee that you're going to win big.
No.
And I think it does a really good job of simulating poverty in that sense in every session of the game, rather than just it being the meta frame. Everything has a cost, and when you finish a job and you get paid and you have money and you might have extra money, you've always got an eye on your retirement. Healing yourself up costs money. Everything that you do costs you something. If you're not out on the job and doing work, then you're losing income, effective income. And it is the way the world is run. So it's when you look at the big picture, the world is run on lost income and lost profits. If you didn't work 2 days in a week, it's not that you just didn't make extra money. It's that you lost out on the income that you could have made that day, right? And I don't know. I really love that part of Red Markets, and that is a core of the system. I hope that's how it's been feeling to you when playing it, Lo.
Oh, yeah.
So I am going to flip around the what I'm less sure about, and then, I'm going to take a leaf from Rich's book, and I'm going to do the thorns first, and then the stars, the roses next.
Sure.
So the tricky things about Red Markets is there's a lot of numbers, a lot of different charges, a lot of different things. It's tricky to run online because of the tabs. So much easier when you just got a piece of paper in front of you that you can scratch away with a pencil, and you can just flip the pages back and forth. And if someone's unsure about something, I just lean over and point at the piece of paper. Online, I have to use a main character keeper with all of the stuff in for like the group, and then everyone has to have their own individual character sheet that then has a second sheet for gear, and things are split over across it. And there's probably a more elegant way to do that, but I hate rejigging working Excel sheets. So yeah, that's the tricky part of running it online, I think. And tied in with that is there is a lot to internalize about how gear works. Like the tags are all specific to the type of gear and what it means. as someone who has listened to a lot of Red Markets and played a fair bit of it, really, overall, I could maybe do without having to see the full gear tab. And if it said it was capped or if it was charged or whatever, I would know. But that's only GMing it as well, right? Like, where you internalize a hell of a lot because you explain it to other people. It does follow a very solid core principle, though. While I'm even giving that caveat, it is like the black versus the R plus modifiers. Check to see if you have to spend anything even to make the roll, and then check to see if you want to spend anything to make more roll. So it's a tricky thing. It's part of the flavor. It's part of the feel.
I don't think I've even read Red Markets. Probably if I have, it was a long time ago. So I may be incorporating this wrong. But certainly from my perspective, I know, particularly with that sort of setup as well, I find it difficult to make decisions about whether I want to spend when I don't have the knowledge of how that's going to work, if you know what I mean. So I can see how having to like internalize all of that and know if it's actually worth you trying to do X with Y because of whatever else is, yeah, it can be a real, aside from the fact I'm just really bad at using consumables in any sort of game I'm in anyway. But
you're the guy who ends every RPG with 50 healing potions
exactly,
and Phoenix Downs and never yeah. I am totally the opposite. I will burn through everything to get to the point, which is probably why it appeals to me. Yeah. It's totally, do I want to spend a ration? It's going to bite your face off. Please spend those rations so I don't have to think about what happens there. Part of that is also it's a little bit difficult to tweak like a lot of other games because it's an economy. If you change one number, another number may change in the other side, right?
A lot of moving parts.
Yeah. I think they run together very elegantly, but there are a lot of moving parts. And, and part of all of that moving parts is that it is a trad-style dice rolling game in a lot of senses. It does abstract a lot of it. It's very granular in what you track, but those are all abstracted to a great extent, right? You're not counting individual bullets, you're counting charges on your gun, you're not counting like you eat in 5 meals, you're counting rations that represent your overall thing. Bounty, it has a lot of meta currencies that abstract a lot of those things that get too bogged down in other games. But there is a lot of dice rolling, particularly because it's a game with a self-control, sanity kind of style mechanic, which is really interesting. But in our game, that's one of the things that I throw out of the window as soon as we get into any kind of action, because getting 4 people to make self-control checks and then tell me what it is a little bit painful. And then by the same token, I'll probably never use the actual initiative rules as written. Which involves you all rolling black plus speed and then me rolling red dice to insert the enemies into, and then the casualties go last. Casualties always go last. And I'm like, I'm going to popcorn that and completely, Which again, I think removes some of the swinginess for it, but I think that's a change I'll make for it. Those are the barriers for Red Markets as a wider game compared to like PBTA or stuff like that. But there's a lot that I really, really, really enjoy about Red Markets. So what worked for me is, I've touched on it just previously, it's the pressure of being a taker or a hustler. We built a community and we have a job to focus on, like a mission, but it's all about how much money can you make out of this? I really enjoy that level of focus and a tangible reward to the end of it. It's not just 10,000 gold coins that I can only spend on a magic sword, which gives me a +1 to a die that's going to increase anyways. Who cares? It's very hard to get tangible rewards in most games. Red Markets, I feel, makes you be like, I got 30 bounty. Yes. I found a rifle that it means I don't have to spend the money on. Yes. Like, it's great. And I love the idea that you don't get all of those things. That's sort of like the slow bleed threat. I also love how swingy and potentially fatal everything is. Paul went off on a side mission to fulfill his crazed belief to kill as many casualties as possible, and then nearly got his leg blown. Well, he did get his leg blown off pretty much.
Yep.
Rolled a 10 on the damage die with a rifle, went to a place with no armor. And that could happen at any moment, right? Every combat could be that. And any one of you gets bit, the chances are you're going to become a zombie. The odds are that you're going to be one bit and you're dead, unless everyone's willing to spend the money to save you from it and turn you into a walking infection.
And in case it hasn't been clear throughout, when Will says casualties, that's the euphemism that the game uses for zombies.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the other thing I love about it is the setting, the lore. Red Markets has 172 pages of introduction before you get to the rules, but I think it's good stuff, frankly.
It is.
It's a bit prescient, isn't it? Like I said, yeah, a little bit too uncomfortable with, it was written 3 years before the pandemic, but there's a lot of the additional back lore that goes that you think, I saw that happening last year. Great.
Yeah.
But it does build a really interesting world as well. The bounty system, I think, is a great concept to
Hmm.
build around, even though I don't think many people necessarily have to engage with it. But the idea of like that proof of death has value in a world where the government is just waiting to take back the wasteland, and how that creates like a link between the two different worlds. You don't just live out in the wastelands, you live out in effectively the slums. You're in a third world country and they're in a first, to use some outdated terms.
It's not even just that, like the bounty is people's ID, as you said. If you find people's identifications, driver's licenses, that's proof of death. You give that to the government. The government gives you a bounty because that means that the government could seize their assets, or corporations could seize their assets. But that's all anticipating that eventually they'll be able to take back the wasteland, or these areas that the casualties are, which itself is a pipe dream.
Which is capitalism, right?
It's all this imaginary structure. Just, oh my God.
Yeah, which I love because, again, the bad guy is capitalism, and it's also what feeds you at the end of the day.
What's I think is interesting to me about this is obviously I came into this talking about Voidheart Symphony, which has some similar ideas in the terms of the idea of you having to live in this hyper-capitalist world and all the pressures that exerts on you. But in Voidheart Symphony, and this is like very explicit, this is something Mina calls out in the rule book, this sort of the idea of the cycle of play is obviously you have the real world, which is designed to be kind of grinding and throw obstacles in your path and to be difficult. And in the castle, that's like the moment for like catharsis and sort of overcoming obstacles and really like being able to sort of like go wild.
You have something you can punch.
Exactly, yeah.
iHunt has the same thing, which is also about another kind of economic horror and poverty, but in the end you get to punch something in the face in a way that's satisfying.
I feel like Red Markets is more like you're working a shift, a very dangerous, unpleasant shift that you come back to and your problems are all still there.
Oh, yeah.
Unless you're takedown, in which case you're retiring next session because he only has 5 things that he needs to keep track of.
Yeah.
But yeah. And these are all about Red Markets, the game, but in particularly like the Enclave building stuff and the generation and stuff. I wasn't sure how much time to spend on that. We've spent a whole first session on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed that we did because we built this Camp Lazarus that was completely like generated by all the players. It's led to some great team dynamics as we've got into it. The tension of money between friends and co-workers and split jobs. I can see Lowell's character is going to have to call in some debts on some of his fellow takers sometimes because he bleeds every single session. It's one thing that I've been doing as we've been going on is like, you do some jobs and then I add a bit more to it, an area, I reflavor some of the jobs that I had. Like you mentioned going back and killing that samurai who messed with you last time. He's a hipster samurai who studied the way of the blade, of course.
I said to them, we just got to kill this dude, and they did not listen to me.
But he may make an appearance in the future as opposed to being a one-off thing. And one thing I've really enjoyed is ripping off from the Gauntlet. And I've been treating it a bit like Stephen King prepping a RPG campaign. It's always, I've just gone through the new Gauntlet comics wiki and taken some things, and we're setting it around our fictional setting of New Gauntlet City from Gauntlet City comics. Some of the rival taker crews in the area are the trophy hunters, who basically PCs from the game Trophy Dark, or there's the murder mavens who track down missing people in a loss. And I've got more of that stuff, and it just really helps. Good. Like, yeah, I enjoy doing it, and I enjoy seeing like Jim's face light up when I say Hedgebrook Academy is where you'll be going to. So I can't get away from the self-indulgent references. Then finally, it's a game that we talked about previously until you did your post-apocalyptic blog about it, but we've discussed it in the past because it's a pandemic themed game ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
I lean towards like fairly nihilistic horror in most games. I think it's never bothered me as a theme, but like I respect that everybody else does, and I don't think you can do a zombie game without those themes coming up in some way. But I think it's actually not been as forefront, and it might be just due to Red Market's economic theming being the major focus, but I think that it's there, but it doesn't seem as potentially troublesome as I thought it might be. And I just thought that was interesting because of the context and everything. I've stayed a little bit away from some of the things, like the actual crash that took place, some of the lore. But otherwise, I think, you can run zombie games without touching on it too much.
I will say, I don't think I've had a moment of horror in a game for a very long time like it did when I had worked my ass off negotiating the job, and we went and did the job, and at the end, I had no money. Everybody else had made money. I had to pay for all my stuff, and I had made zero. And not even just made zero, like I owed more at the end of that job. That was wild.
What's more horrifying than your fictional character dying? Your fictional character going into debt.
Oof. I'm glad you're running it. I think it's a really interesting game, and I'm so glad I've had a chance to play it. And I'm so glad you're running it and I'm not. Because I couldn't pull the trigger like you do. I just couldn't. There are some moments when you've done stuff where I've been like, well, maybe I could do this. And you're like, nope, lol. Nope, that's not going to happen. Whereas if I were the GM, I'd be softy.
I know, but I am still softer than I
know.
Feel I should be, you know?
It doesn't feel like it.
Good.
Wow. Well, let's move on to the opposite of this, to our final segment. Listeners, in our final segment, each of us is going to talk about something that has been inspiring us or giving us joy. So, David, what is giving you life?
For me, what's giving me life at the minute, one of the reasons that I said my game load's been a little bit lighter the last couple of months is I've just recently moved house, very 5 minutes up the road from where I was before, but we have a little bit of garden out back, which would be nice if we hadn't just gone through like 3 weeks of perpetual grey gloom. But the thought's nice anyway. But no, it's just been nice after a year and a half of staring at the same four walls every day. It's nice to have a new set of walls to stare at for a while. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, what's giving you life?
Well, for the last couple of weeks, I've been going down to a place in a town nearby, like a big storage unit, and I've been volunteering to help out with like the Afghani refugees who are coming over, collecting a load of donations, and there's so many donations, and that's for this charity called Care for Calais. And I've never really done volunteering before. I deliver food during lockdown to people, but it's very like impersonal, and starting the clothes is pretty impersonal as well, but like you're working with a lot of other people doing a huge task that is all ultimately to like help people. And honestly, as schmaltzy as it sounds, that does give me life, because it's very nice to just see everyone's generosity, like a side of life that, to return to the themes that we talked about earlier, is ground out of us by the rest of the system, because capitalism is the bad guy all along. But yeah, it's nice to see. So this is giving me life, definitely.
Awesome. What's giving me life is maybe a little more prosaic. I've mentioned on the Twitter and on the Gauntlet Slack, I did a hard brute force translation of the Spanish language Adventure Time RPG. And that got me back to rewatching all the shows and, more importantly, rereading the comic books, which I think...
The comics are good.
The first 35 issues of that, done by Ryan North, are like, I would say, my top 5 comic book creations of all time for me.
Wow.
Okay. Rereading it again, you realize just
You're
how...
a big comic book fan as well.
Oh,
so
yeah,
that's a big compliment.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Realizing how well they managed to balance surrealism and kids' cartooniness and pathos, like real honest human existence and pathos in the books and the TV show. And there's a whole set of other like standalone graphic novels that are done by really interesting authors. And so just delving back into that has been an absolute pleasure. So that's what's giving me life.
I watched all of Adventure Time during lockdown.
Oh.
I rewatched the series that I had watched, and then I got all the other series and watched it to the end. And I'm very glad that I did.
Yeah, it holds together so well. Listeners, that's our show. The Gauntlet Podcast is a production of The Gauntlet. We have an online gaming calendar, the Gauntlet Gaming Calendar, where folks can sign up for our sessions. If you've enjoyed this show, consider supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/Gauntlet. That supports everything that we do, including our network of podcasts, our magazine Codex. You can find out more about all of that at gauntlet-rpg.com. You can also reach us on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG or on Facebook at the Gauntlet.rpg group. Everybody says it. We'll say it again. Please consider rating and reviewing our show. That really helps us out, helps boost everything up for us. So if you have a chance, do that on whatever pod thinger you're working from. David, thank you again for co-hosting with me.
No, thank you very much. It's been great to get a chance to sit down and chat with you both.
Yeah. And Will, thank you for coming on the show today. We really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
And listeners, that is our show.